So the Canadian Bankers Association, with its diverse stakeholders, with the mandate to be consensus-based, you go into discussions with the Government of Canada. Do you go to the table with concessions in your back pocket on public policy matters? Do you have wiggle room as the CEO?
That's in the public policy environment, that's a very tough question, because ultimately these are not parties on equal standing, right? Ultimately the government has the power. Ultimately the government can bring down the hammer. And it's happened before where, for political reasons or, market reasons, a rule, a regulation is needed. What I like to, so I don't see it as sort of a concession strategy so much as
options?
As kind of options. Now, this is where the consensus-based approach that the CBA has, I won't say a weakness, but it has advantages and disadvantages. The disadvantages are that it sometimes can be a little rigid, but the advantage is that you can always take that pause to go back and get further directions from your membership. And sometimes a pause in negotiations to say, well, I need to get instructions can be helpful. There's an old story about Nixon and Kissinger. I think it was the Paris Peace Accords, where Kissinger was going off to Paris and Nixon says, I have given him full powers to negotiate. But what that did was take away the option of going back to the boss to say, sorry, I need to get further instructions. So sometimes to say, well, we've reached an impasse. We need to regroup, and I'll get further instructions. On a consensus base, we don't freelance, David, and so the wiggle room is narrower than maybe in other situations. But what I can do, and this is where the trust comes in, I can say, look, we've tried this, you're not buying that. You want this to happen. Can you, government, give me maybe a Model A or a Model B or another alternative that we might be able to play with, and I can come back to you. So I put the onus on them, in effect, to articulate not a concession strategy, but options.
How do you deal with deception?
Deception is corrosive to the negotiating process. It's corrosive. It undermines the trust that you and I have talked about, it undermines the credibility. And as soon as it manifests, my own sense is, whoa, let's just, we have to call people on it. Again, not in a way that's going to get their dander up, but let's make sure we understand the facts here. Like, I thought we had the facts agreed to, but I'm hearing something different. Let's step back. Let's go back to first principles and to the facts. Have we got this right? Rather than saying, hey, you're, but you have to you can't let it go, because then it weaves itself into the narrative of the negotiations. But that's where trust and credibility is very important.
Have you got any examples where deception has been played on you?
Well, that's
either at the bank or elsewhere?
Yeah. I won't give you the substance because, we're dealing with public policy and government and confidentiality here. There will be times, and this is not recently, this is in days gone by, where one of the parties, usually, I don't say a party politically, but one of the players in a negotiation either feels that they have to get something done quick, or they have a mandate from their boss. And we have to get this done. It has to go to cabinet. And I'm happy to sit down and talk with you, but it's got to go. And they do not reveal key issues. They do not reveal, say, key consequences that would be important to my side. And I always go into these things, on a trust basis. That has happened in the past, and typically it backfires, because once it gets to the decision-making point in this multi-party thing, one way or another, the truth comes out, and it's not pretty. Rare is it that the person who tries to cut corners or deceive, that's actually a winning strategy. Usually it's not, because honestly, the truth will out.
So there is deception, but something much more often than just say deception is difficult people,
Oh, yeah.
internal
Yep.
and external. How do you handle that?
Well, you have to, A, thick skin, B, you've got to have a lot of patience. But C, I go back to what I said earlier is there's two things. Don't focus on the person, focus on the interests first. Secondly, if you can, take the emotion out of it. Because often difficult people will simply just get your dander up and your gorge rises, you're angry, and then you can't think clearly.
Any examples of doing that, Terry? Because we hear that often, is try to take the emotion out of it.
So, as you can imagine, in a very diverse industry and workforce like the banking industry, you're dealing with, at any one time the CBA is dealing with thousands of people, hundreds certainly, and statistically there are going to be some difficult people. My counsel to my staff, and I try to follow this myself, is hone in on what that person's saying and keep coming back to what their interests are. They might just be throwing abuse at you or anger, and you're not doing this, you're not doing that. What are you interested in? Now, I don't say it necessarily that way, but coming back to, well, what would work for you? And it's just a matter of continued persistence to try to get them to articulate that. It doesn't always work, but sometimes if you can sort of say, almost get out of yourself and be a third-party observer. Terry's sitting here, but Terry's watching from over here and saying, oh, I see what's going on here. If you can do that, it's a skill you've got to learn. Difficult people, though, it's if you can take the emotion out and don't focus on the person, focus on the issue.
Another big aspect, I think, of your job as president of the Canadian Bankers Association is how best to deal with the media.
Oh boy, yeah. With the media, first of all, if you are in a negotiation, I'll deal with it more generally, but in a specific negotiation or discussions, I don't deal through the media. I don't negotiate through the media, negotiate by headline. I don't like that because it upsets the other side. It isn't really seen as a fair approach, and they might do it back to you. Ditto, I don't like to do this selective leaks kind of thing. Again, because I think it undermines credibility. So I will, if there's something, and this has happened many times, if I'm in the middle of discussions with the government and people say, well, surely you're talking to the government about this, what did they say, what are you saying? I have tried to have exit strategies, and it's usually along the lines of, well, we're in discussions with the government at all times because we have a mutual interest in strong public policy, and these discussions continue. Thank you, Generally, however, with the media, say outside of a negotiation setting, the same rules apply. I mean, these are people doing a job. In the main, for the most part, they're not out to get you, they're not gotcha, certainly the more respected professional journalists. If you trust them, if they trust you, if you give them, you may not be able to give them the full picture, but what you do give them has to be true, accurate, and helpful. And I always think discussions with the media, two things. They have to feel that they're getting something valuable, that I'm not pulling their chain. And I'm always saying, notwithstanding what they're asking me, what is it that I want to achieve here? What am I trying to get them, what idea am I planting in their head? So between those two things, I try to have a trust-based discussion.
Is that part of your preparation as well?
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. So when I do an interview, media interview, I will have my staff pull out the last year's worth of that person's columns or that person's articles. I will do a bit of triangulation about, if I see themes there. I will talk to people who know them, talk to, the experts to say, what is this person's MO? I want to know what they're going to ask. But I want to know, it isn't just, I'm going in out of the goodness of my heart. I've got an agenda too, right? And I don't sort of say, hello, Mr. and Mrs. Journalist, I have an agenda, but you kind of weave it into discussion, usually through eliciting from them what they're interested in. And then, I say, well, what's on your plate? What stories you're following? You're talking about capital levels. Let me tell you about this. That's how we do it.
How do bankers and in particular your constituents, how do they deal with the proliferation of social media, which is different from the general context of the media?
Yeah.
You have Facebook, you have Twitter, you have Instagram, you have YouTube, you have Snapchat, all of these things. How does the Bankers Association deal with that flood that's out there?
And it is a flood. And I would say all of us are still, you used the word protocol earlier. It's a good word. All of us are developing protocols as to how most effectively to deal with that. And I think, quite frankly, it's ever evolving, ever changing. So just from my own organization's point of view, we have had to put protocols in. Remember, our job is to represent the banks. We're not talking on our own account. It's not for the greater glory of Terry Campbell or one of my staff. We're speaking for the banks, and therefore there is both a dignity and a responsibility in terms of how we say things and what we say. So we have protocols. We have some vetting steps. Junior staff can't just send out a tweet. It has to go up the line a little bit. We always have to ask, why are we doing this? Why are we sending this? How does this help our industry?
And how do you coordinate that with your constituents?
Yeah.
For instance, there's a run against the Canadian Bankers Association because of visa fees.
Yeah.
So you're going to provide certain responses. Are they in line with what your constituents will likely say? Because they're going to be hit up as well.
Well, the challenge here is...
Get everybody on the same page?
Well, the challenge of getting everybody on the same page, what I was going to say is in terms of social media, you used to have like almost 24 hours. There'd be an issue and you could
Not
think,
anymore.
Not anymore. The response time is compressed and compressed and compressed and compressed. So you have to be much quicker. And so what that means is both from a systems point of view and from a people point of view, you've got to be plugged in. So from a systems point of view, you have to have the wherewithal to be constantly monitoring what your banks are saying and what maybe some of the critics are saying. And we have a staff member whose job is basically to do that all day. But you also have to know, so for instance, if an issue comes up, let's say it's service charges or whatever, our communications people, we will have already built up an extensive set of positions, messages, statements. So that's already there, and we can just pull them and tweak them as necessary. But we also are in regular, ongoing contact with their counterparts in the banks. So if something arises, out a note goes saying, this has come up, we propose that we are going to deal with that. Everything okay? Yes, and here's what we're going to say, ba-dum. Let me know if you get any stuff. In other words, it's email, it's phone, it is social media, but it is a swirl, and the response times are just like that.
Is that becoming a major, not necessarily issue, but a major preoccupation of time, is monitoring as to what is taking place?
It is. Increasingly, it's a real-time thing. What you see, and not so much with our industry, but you see it around the world, is increasingly you see it, and it is an issue that rumors or quasi-facts or alt-facts or things like that can take on a currency because of social media. There's myriad examples of this. And so it kind of reinforces that need to be very, very timely and to be able to have facts and a degree of credibility on your side to be able to respond. That just amps up the pressure, but it's true everywhere, right?
We were talking earlier before our program, in terms of what had happened in the United States
Yes.
during their financial fiasco when governments had to bail out some of the financial institutions. And we here in Canada were saying, hey, our Canadian Banking Association is super, it's great, whatnot. Has that maintained itself in the eyes of the public, that our system of banking is pretty good when you put us up against other parts of the world?
Well, thank you for that, David. I appreciate you saying that, but I think it's true. You know, the financial crisis was going on 8 years ago now, 8 or 9 years ago, and you would think that over time the memories would begin to fade. We do a lot of polling of Canadians, we do a lot of surveying, and that sense of, hey, you know, our banks are, you know, stood up and they didn't require any bailouts, and, you know, they kept doing what they're supposed to doing. Well, yeah, you know, we're kind of proud of them. That is still there, because we still see around the world the ramifications 8 years on of banks that didn't do what banks were supposed to do. Whether it's, you know, banks in Europe, banks south of the border, you know, various crises or scandals that still crop up, regrettably more than they should. People know that that's not happening here. And so when we poll and probe, there is a degree of respect. There certainly is a degree of trust in, you know, the whole issue of security, safety, soundness. My personal information is going to be taken, is going to be protected. High degrees of trust there. And because increasingly this plugged-in world, people know what is happening in other jurisdictions, and they realize not happening here. So yes, it is maintained.
So from your perspective as the Chief Executive Officer of the Canadian Banking Association, you have to have a window, if I may say, a window on what's happening internationally
Yes,
in the
indeed.
banking community.
Yep.
Because something that happens in country X, you need to be aware of it to make sure that if it's bad, it's not going to happen here.
Right, that's true. So one of the themes of our discussion, David, has been relationships.
I'm going to come to that in a moment.
Yeah, but on that, we've actually formed over the last 10 years a very good network and very good relationships with my counterparts all around the world, all the major banking jurisdictions, and we are in regular contact, and I feel that if an issue arises in country X, I can either get on the phone, depending on the time difference, or email, and I will get an answer just like that. And it's more than just what's happening, it's why is it happening? What's driving it? Because I need to know here if that's going to motivate a similar kind of push. And again, things are better in Canada, banking-wise, than the rest of the world, and thank goodness for that.
In your experience with the Canadian Bankers Association, have you found that the determinants of your organization have evolved over a period of time?
That's okay, and I would say yes. I'm going to answer that in two ways. One, the nature of the banking industry, the structure of it has changed. So as we talked about right up front, and this evolved, say, over probably 30 years. 30 years ago, we would not have spoken about Canadian Tire Bank, Rogers Bank, Walmart Bank, stuff like that. But we do now. 40 years ago, we wouldn't have had the array of foreign banks in this country. So part of the determinants is we have a much richer, very diverse, competitive industry than we might have had in the past. One thing. But the second thing is, and it's touching on what you just touched on, technology has changed things dramatically. 10 years ago, the concept of doing all your banking and doing your, managing your portfolios, making investments, getting loans, et cetera, on your smartphone. First of all, what was a smartphone? Everything is moving is being driven by technology. Customer behavior is changing. I'm a boomer, and I do certain things in a certain way. Millennials do things in a very different kind of way, and much of it enabled by technology. Those are two big determining factors that makes it a different world than when I started.
I ask you that because I have a concern that this is really not a negotiating question, but I think it's a fair question. I have a concern. I think our Canadian banks are outstanding. I think we have great credibility, great security that our money is safe. But I worry that there are groups in our society, as we saw most recently in the United States election, of the fake news. And I wonder, you know, people who may have a bee in their bonnet about our banking system in Canada, that their bee in their bonnet is the fake news option. And I'm wondering what banks and their association, your association, are doing to be watchful of those kinds of things.
I would say, first of all, again, it sort of goes to motivations and what we've seen south of the border, and I want to comment too specifically on developments there, but there is disenchantment and feeling of disenfranchisement, disaffection that is driving a lot of that turmoil. Speaking very specifically about the banking industry in this country, a couple of things stand out. First of all, other jurisdictions have a large proportion of unbanked adult population. That's not the case in Canada. Depending on who the stats, between 96 and 99% of Canadians have an account. We have a well-structured system of complaint redress, complaint investigation on a variety of fronts, and banks take that relationship. This is not just a transactional kind of thing where you can bounce from institution. They take the relationship very importantly, seriously. So what I would say is that, well, you know, the modern world is what it is, and you know, there's the fake news phenomenon. But if it does happen, it's in the context of a high degree of, I think, respect for the industry. And I think that will always stand us in good stead.
Big issue in negotiations and advocacy is the issue of relationships.
Yep.
So where does the association stand on relationships? And where do the constituent elements of the Bankers Association stand on relationships? An old professor of mine, he used to say, you know, cameo appearances get cameo results.
Oh, that's interesting. I like that. I like that. If you don't mind, I will borrow that and I will use it. Well, I'm going to start off a high level and then get more granular. One of the strengths of the Canadian system, in contrast to many other jurisdictions, is that the main players know each other fairly well on both sides. We have one prudential regulator, one market conduct regulator, one policymaker, and one association. Even in the United States, you know, there are multiple banking associations, and you know, the collectivity of the heads of the banking industry, it's a known commodity. What that does, it makes dialogue, regular dialogue, deep dialogue, respectful dialogue, that much better. And so on the relationship, cameo appearance is very good. I like that. There isn't a day that goes by, David. So our prudential regulator is called OSFI. That's our acronym. There is not a day that goes by that the CBA staff at some level is not in dialogue with OSFI. And it's a fact-based dialogue, it's a respectful dialogue. They are the boss, but look, we both have an interest in making the system work. That goes for all the other parts. I have gone around the world, and we do not see that kind of system. People say, really, that's how it works in Canada? You have those relationships? It's not sort of like confrontational? No. We know who the boss is, but they value our input because they trust us as much as we value the opportunity. Maybe that's just unique to Canada because of our structure. We are a relatively small country. I often make the joke that you could get all the players in the financial sector and put them in a minibus, drive around Queen's Park, you'd have an answer, right? It's a little joke, but we're we're kind of blessed in Canada because of that structure. So on negotiations are tough, they're detailed, but it's not cameo, right? All the players know each other and know where they're coming from and have that talk.
So the substance in terms of the relationship is the fact that you've institutionalized to a certain extent
yes, in a
the
way.
kind of dialogue, with your constituents, your association, the regulator, government policy makers, and things of that nature. So you just don't meet with the Minister of Finance once a year.
Exactly. So that's a very good way to put it. It is institutionalized. We have sort of regular formal engagements, but it's regularly supplemented by the one-on-one, more informal.
Could you exist without having those good relationships?
Well, we could exist, but we would be considerably less effective than we are.
And is that what you've seen in other parts of the world, where relationships are not to the degree that they are, say, in Canada?
What happens, and again, I don't want to pick on any one jurisdiction, David, but what happens is much more of a reliance upon, or you get much more evidence of kind of a gotcha approach. There is much more the element of surprise. We've done a stress test on you, and we're going to let you know the results at 4 o'clock in the afternoon when we issue a press release. Oh my goodness gracious! There tends to be, I used the phrase before, a bit of an air war. Where governments will, lob a regulation or an accusation, and the industry lobs back a battle of the press releases. Very unproductive, in my view. Very unproductive. In Canada, we have dialogue, and the nature of our system, institutionalized and informal, facilitates that.
2 questions to go. First question is agenda. You are meeting government representatives, Department of Finance, the regulator. What kind of work and effort do you put in establishing what that agenda is? Because you don't want to walk into a room and say there's 5 items on the agenda, and the other side says, no, there's 15, we have another 10.
Yeah.
What sort of effort goes into that?
Well, I think it's that dialogue. It's bilateral. And again, it goes to, I don't like, and I don't find it useful, sort of the element of surprise, because it upsets the other side and it's not productive. And so every time we sit down in a formal kind of setting, there will be a dialogue back and forth.
On the issues.
On the issues. Here are the things that we think would be worthwhile. Does this make sense for you? And they will send it back so that we know right up front. And it isn't just a list of headings. I mean, I will say, we have a concern about this issue. We don't understand this one. We want clarification. So people can say, okay, they want to talk about this. They need more background. It's that kind of dialogue.
So no surprises.
No surprises. What does a surprise do? I suppose there's a philosophy that says, I'll keep this in my back pocket. Aha! Well, I could do the same. And if that happens, I'll say, well, first time I've seen this, time out. I'll need to caucus and go back. So what has the surprise done except upset me, right? So no surprises.
Final question.
Okay.
What would you advise a young person, say at Ryerson University, who's in the process of graduating,
Yep.
Wants to get into the working world, first job? What sort of things would you advise young people to be on the lookout for in terms of being successful in their chosen career, whether it's in finance, whether it's in arts? With your many, many experiences and your relationships that you have in the financial sector, what would you share with them?
I would say 2 things. First of all, be open to new experiences. From the vantage point of where I sit now, at the Canadian Bankers Association, there's no way in 100 million years, David, that I could have predicted that when I started off some 40 years ago. My first job was in an archives. How do you get from archives to banking? So be open to experiences.
That's a good one. That's a good one.
But secondly, this is very important. Technical skills, very important. Whether it's engineering or it's accounting or whatever, technical skills are important, but don't ignore the soft skills. Increasingly, people have to work in teams. They have to be persuasive. They have to negotiate on the job. Employers will look, obviously, for technical skills, but once that's established, they're going to look at you and say, can this person deal with the rest of my team? Will they fit in? Can they think analytically? Can they put disparate pieces of data together and be able to communicate that? Will they be able to persuade? The soft skills, STEM stuff is very important, right? Everybody focuses on STEM. I say, great, good. Don't forget the soft skills. And think about those.
Very good advice.
Good.
Look, on behalf of the Ted Rogers School of Management, the faculty and our students, I want to express to you our sincere appreciation for taking time out of your schedule, sharing your insights about negotiations and some of the examples that you shared with us. And we just want to say a most sincere thanks and continued success.
David, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great.
Good.
Thank
And
you.
good luck to the students.
Thank you.